Thank you everyone for registering for this very, very important program, an opening session to a series that will last through June regarding anti-Semitism in our society. We are going to hear from experts in the field from different organizations who will give us first information and also some ways to deal with what's going on. But we will talk more about it. A few logistical points, issues to make. We're going to ask that everyone put themselves on mute if you're not already. If you have any questions, you can send them in the chat. But I will say that we might not be able to get to the Q&A at the end because of our schedule, but I will be very happy to email questions to the relevant panelists, in the next day or two and provide you with the answer. We're going to try to keep this to about an hour, but if we run over, please stick around. It probably just means we're having a really great and important discussion. And that is basically it. So please keep yourselves on mute and questions in the chat. And I would like to introduce Susan Antman, our Jewish Federation in the Heart of New Jersey's Executive Director.
Well, thank you, Dan, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here tonight to take a stand and learn more about how to combat anti-Semitism. We're all here tonight because we're concerned about Jews being the most targeted religious group in the United States. There's anti-Semitic graffiti in our schools and playgrounds, Holocaust denial, or worse, glorification, anti-Semitism on social media, exclusion of Jewish groups from social action initiatives and university student groups, the demonizing and delegitimizing of Israel, white supremacist violence, and sadly, so much more. This is a critical moment in time for the Jewish community. We must be united, empowered, and able to act quickly and effectively against groups and individuals who wish to do us harm for the simple fact that we are Jews. Tonight, we'll learn valuable lessons, and I'd like to suggest that there's one thing you must remember. So do I have your attention? Okay, the people, the groups, the social spread of biased tropes, whether intentional or otherwise, this Jewish hatred succeeds when Jews are divided. If we are going to foster effective and long-lasting change, we must do it together. Our allies from the interreligious world, academia, and government must feel confident that we are one. And this is why the Jewish Federation has convened these esteemed panelists tonight, representing organizations with expertise in various aspects of battling anti-Semitism in the media, on campus, online, and on our streets. Federation's Jewish Community Relations Council has brought together these experts to empower us, the Jewish community, to advocate and appropriately respond for our safety, our freedom, and in fact, our human rights. And your role and actions are key. Tonight and throughout the series of programs over the next few months, experts will provide training and tools, sharing tactics, strategies, and best practices that work to combat anti-Semitism and secure a vibrant Jewish future. So again, the one thing that I ask you to remember is knowledge plus action plus unity equals the power to effect change. And you are an integral part of this equation. Together, we're stronger, smarter, and we're better able to address issues facing us today and in the future. So thank you again for joining us and for caring. And now it's truly my pleasure to introduce Laron Capiano, Jewish Federation board member and JCRC co-chair, who will introduce our valued partners and moderate tonight's discussion. So Laron, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks everyone else for coming. Obviously, this isn't the most happy topic, but it's something that is affecting all of us. So we have a phenomenal panel here tonight. We have representatives from the ADL, from Stand With Us, from CAMRA, from the State Jewish Federations of New Jersey, and from Open Door Media. From Jewish Federations of New Jersey, we have Josh Cohen. He's the Government Relations and External Affairs. Sarit Katz is the director of the media response team for Camera. Paula Jaffe is executive director of Stand With Us, Mid-Atlantic region. Josh Kunza is a publisher of Open Door Media. Scott Richmond is the ADL New York, New Jersey regional director. So this is about everyone that you would want to be hearing from on this this topic such as it is. We're gonna have a lot of interesting discussion tonight, and I think we're gonna get things started off with Josh from Jewish Federations of New Jersey, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what his organization does, and we're going to hear from each panelist in order about what they do, and then we're going to get into some questions. So, Josh, why don't you take it from here?
Josh, we can't hear you.
Josh
You're
is
not
muted. Yeah.
No, he's not muted.
No.
Okay, we'll go to let's go
to we'll move forward. Actually, we're gonna go next to Paula Jaffe from Stand With Us.
So, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I just want to thank Susan and Dan and Ron for having this important conversation tonight, and it's an honor to be here with such distinguished colleagues. And thanks to Federation for doing what it does best, and that's being the community convener and the hub of Jewish activities in our region. I am pleased to introduce you to Stand With Us. We are an international, nonprofit, and nonpartisan Israel education organization that works to inspire and educate people of all ages about Israel, as well as challenge misinformation and fight against anti-Semitism. So like all of you, we're inspired by our love of Israel and believe that education is the road to peace. That's why we use print materials like these incredible booklets, social media, where we have a tremendous following on the platforms, and our posts are frequently picked up by the press, many of the Jewish publications that I'm sure you read. We have student programs like our Leventhal High School internships and University Emerson Fellowship, middle school curricula, conferences, missions to Israel, Stand With Us TV, a Sadolf Legal Department, and our Center for Combating Anti-Semitism. And we use all of these tools to educate people about Israel and empower people of all ages and backgrounds to reach out to their peers. So in just 20 brief years, we have created a global network with programs on 5 continents and offices throughout the United States, in Israel. Maybe some of you have been to our offices in Jerusalem, in the United Kingdom, in Canada, and Brazil. And each year, we host hundreds of programs that reach thousands of students around the world.
Thank you, Paula. Yeah, Stand With Us, great organization. I know you guys from back when I was at Rutgers University. You did a lot of great stuff when we were there. Next, we're gonna move on to Sarit Katz. Sarit Katz, actually, the director of the media response team.
Hello, thanks to everyone for joining us. Thanks to the Federation, and of course, great to be with my colleagues here. Let me start by telling you what CAMRA is. So CAMRA stands for the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis. We are a nonprofit, non-political media watchdog. We are monitoring, writing about, and responding to media bias against Israel in the coverage that you see and hear and read. We are not only monitoring the American press. You can see this on our website, camera.org, and I urge you all to go there. We also are monitoring press in the UK. We have Camera UK. We are monitoring Hebrew language press. We're monitoring Spanish language press, and we are monitoring Arabic language press. So we are working tirelessly. We have an office in Israel, and we are here in the United States as well. In addition, we have a very vibrant campus division. We train campus fellows. We also support pro-Israel campus groups, and we bring speakers to campuses, and we support them very, very closely. We work very closely with our campuses, and we're always looking to expand. We're at over 100 campuses as of now, and looking to expand. As you all know, the campuses are really a cesspool of anti-Semitism at this time, and anti-Israel activism, and the two go hand in hand. So again, I'd urge you all to go to our website, camera.org, and see what we're doing. And I'm looking forward to answering questions this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarit. Yeah, your campus division, one of my best friends in college was the camera intern. So really appreciate what you guys do for the community. Next up, we're gonna hear a little bit from John Kunza from Open Door Media.
Hey everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. I'm very excited to talk about this topic, even though it is a heavy topic to discuss. So I am with Open Door Media, which is an Israeli and US based media / educational company. I represent the Unpacked publishing site division, which is basically what we're trying to do is being the BuzzFeed meets Vox of the Jewish world. Our brand promise is we unpack the world with nuance. And this is just one part of what Open Door Media does. We're also on YouTube doing video explainers. We have an educational division that works very close with the federations with their programming. We have a podcast division. We have a film division. So we're basically trying to do what we call a surround sound approach when it comes to providing information that is Jewish based.
All right, very good. Thank you, John. Also holds a place in my heart. I actually used to work for the predecessor for Open Doors. So really familiar with what you guys do, and really love it too. I think next we're gonna go to Scott Richmond from the ADL.
Thanks so much, Dharan, and thanks so much for hosting this important event. And thanks so much to all of you for spending your evening dealing with this issue. Obviously, very important issue, very close to it, ADL's heart. For those of you not so familiar with ADL, we've been around since 1913. We're not a new organization. Our mission back in 1913 was that we fight hate. We fight anti-Semitism and hate in all its forms. We've always been about fighting both. It's not just about fighting anti-Semitism, but any form of hate. And the way we've done that through the years has changed, has morphed with the type of hate that we're seeing, and of course with the times. I only have a couple minutes, so I'm not going to give you a full description of everything that ADL does. This will, I'm sure, come out in the discussion, but I just want to present 4 points to you in terms of the way I see ADL. The first point is I see ADL as an incredibly innovative organization, very entrepreneurial. This comes directly from Jonathan Greenblatt, our CEO, who actually played that role in the White House during the Obama administration. He was the Chief Innovation Officer. And I'll give you one example of that, and that's our Center for Technology and Society. Our Center for Technology and Society is focused on combating online hate. These are a dozen people in Silicon Valley who are software engineers, who are programmers, and they all come from these companies, and they're fighting online hate using the most incredibly innovative tools. The second is that we're quantitative. So everybody relies on ADL for the quantitative information related to anti-Semitism. We do our annual audit every year, and I'll give you the statistics a little bit later on, but everybody relies on that. Law enforcement, the Jewish community, the non-Jewish community, this is who we are, and it's all through our Center on Extremism. The third is that ADL is an organization that works in the trenches. We very much are not just speaking out about anti-Semitism, but really responding to it. So we have 25 offices across the United States. I am the director of the largest office covering New York and New Jersey. And those offices are all responding to anti-Semitic incidents every single day. On average, There are 30 incidents a week that are reported to my office that we are responding to, very much in the trenches and working with law enforcement, working with government officials, with community officials, faith leaders, federations, et cetera, in doing so. And the last point is that we are a proactive organization. ADL has an enormous anti-bias, anti-bullying education program across the country. More than 1.3 million students a year go through that program. And it's obviously very, very forward-looking, trying to change the future.
Wow, that's a lot. I can't say I have a direct personal connection to the ADL, but certainly the work you guys do has an impact on everything we do at the JCRC and on the Jewish community as a whole. So thank you also for everything that you do. I think Josh is still having some technical difficulties, so we'll move on for now. It's not likely that we're going to have enough time for participant question and answer. So what we ended up doing was we took a lot of the questions that people had emailed us in advance, and we're going to work that into our discussion tonight. We may have some time at the end. I'm not sure. No, it doesn't really look like it. But if you have any questions that you wanted to get answered that didn't get brought up and discussed tonight, please email Dan Rosette at your earliest convenience, and he's going to work hard to get your question answered by one of these excellent representatives, or by one of us. So,
Liran,
yes.
Josh is actually on. He's good
Josh
to go.
is on. All right, Josh, can you make yourself known?
Yes, hi, I'm here.
Excellent. Right in the nick of time. All right.
I apologize for that. We've only been doing this for almost 2 years, and I had to quickly switch computers, so my apologies.
Yeah.
So just first of all, thank you to the Jewish Federation in the heart of New Jersey for hosting this really timely conversation. And I'm grateful to be here to talk about Jewish Federations of New Jersey. And I'm also grateful to be here with my colleagues who work for some of the best organizations that I know, and then I have the privilege of collaborating with. Jewish Federations of New Jersey is the public affairs and community relations arm of 5 of New Jersey's largest Jewish federations, and there are affiliated and beneficiary agencies, of which the Jewish Federation in the heart of New Jersey is one of them. We serve as the coordinating voice on a range of state and federal and international issues that are of interest to New Jersey's Jewish community of approximately 500,000 people. We advocate for key legislation that helps further federations work domestically and abroad and impacts the safety and security of Jewish institutions and communities across the state. We also work in close collaboration with a variety of interfaith and secular nonprofit agencies on issues that affect everyone, really. Some of our most vulnerable populations to our children, really cradle to grave type policy and advocacy work. And we do this because state and federal policies directly impact federations, their partner agencies, and the tens of thousands of people that they serve every day in senior and community centers, family and children's service agencies, vocational programs, and more. And we really strive to work for across-the-board policy solutions that benefit everyone, whether it's Holocaust survivors to people with disabilities, charitable organizations here at home, or across the global Jewish community.
All right, Josh, thanks very much for that. You've been an excellent partner on this. I'll never forget when me and you were in Washington, D.C., right before COVID, speaking with our Representative Chris Smith. That was something. And actually, on that note, the first question is actually for you, Josh. So again, glad you were able to get back into this. Can you speak as to why national Jewish organizations should work with federations rather than going it alone? Like, what does federation bring to the table, and what role can the federation play, especially regarding local advocacy efforts, relationship building outside the Jewish community, and security initiatives?
That's a great question, Laurent. Thank you. So every day, federations like Jewish Federation in the heart of New Jersey are on the ground and in the community. And they're conveners of the Jewish community. And they have the power to mobilize the Jewish community on both a local, state, and national level on issues that are important to our community and ensuring that those interests are addressed. We are viewed as a trusted community partner. We have developed and forged relationships with our elected officials and our representatives. We educate and engage our community, and we build coalitions with other political and faith-based groups. This ensures that our voice is heard on issues, and those issues which are central to our values as Jews and as Americans. And additionally, our advocacy work serves to build bridges of communication and understanding. You know, at Federation, we're of the philosophy that if you want a friend, you have to be a friend. So forging those relationships, whether it's national organizations coming to Federation or Federation proactively reaching out to those organizations, we each bring something unique and special to the table. And we have a much bigger and stronger impact when we're working together, collaboratively, speaking with one voice on issues that are of importance to all of us in areas where we can work synergistically.
All right. Next question for Scott. The ADL tracks and compiles data on extremism, including anti-Semitism. How does this work exactly? And can you give us a brief snapshot of the data on a national, state, and local level? Where are you seeing the most activity? And more importantly, are you able to determine the main driving ideology or ideologies behind anti-Semitism in New Jersey and in general?
Thanks so much for that question. So the way ADL tracks anti-Semitic incidents is through our incident response. I mean, we do surveys. We survey the Jewish community. We ask, have you experienced anti-Semitism? Are you worried about anti-Semitism? All of that takes place. But our annual audit, the numbers that people rely on, it's not a survey. It's an actual compilation of the work that we're doing through the year. So I mentioned we have 25 offices. In 2020, those 25 offices encountered and dealt with anti-Semitic incidents in 47 states. And that's where we get our numbers from. And what do those numbers show? Well, 2019, we've been doing this since 1979. In 2019, on our 40th year, it was the highest year on record. So that year was the year of the Jersey City, the tragic Jersey City shooting, Muncie, some very, very troubling events. The following year was 2020, the year of the pandemic. And we expected the numbers to go down considerably. People were socially distant, they were in quarantine. And while the numbers went down by a small amount, they were still at historic highs. They were still higher than 2018, higher than 2017, higher than 2016. We're at over 2,000 incidents a year that ADL is dealing with. And that's very, very troubling. And just to talk about the trajectory, if we look at, say, 2013, just go back 7 or 8 years, you're going to see that the number of incidents that we were dealing with was around 750. So the jump is enormous just in the past few years, and obviously very, very troubling. When we look at more local numbers, I mentioned there are 47 states where we were dealing with anti-Semitism, and New York is number 1 by far, and New Jersey is number 2 of those 47 states. There are a few other states that are just, they're not even close to New York and New Jersey, but they're still high. And then most states are in the double digits or below. 2020, there were 295 incidents in New Jersey. And that's of course, very troubling. In terms of the question of where it comes from, so, ADL is tracking anti-Semitism, extremism on the left and on the right. I can't point to a single ideology, but you certainly see it on both sides. Each are bad, and each manifests itself differently. So on the right, you're generally seeing neo-Nazi activity. You're seeing white nationalist activity. On the left, you're mostly seeing anti-Israel activity. That's sort of the spectrum of what you're dealing with. Each one of those needs to be dealt with differently. Each one of those manifests themselves differently. And the only other thing that I'll say is that when ADL tracks these anti-Semitic incidents, we're looking at it in different categories. So first of all, we divide it into assaults. So assault, like an attack on somebody, vandalism, which very often manifests itself in terms of a swastika on a synagogue or at a school, and harassment. So harassment is the largest number. A lot of the online forms of anti-Semitism end up being harassment, Zoom bombing, is a form of harassment that we saw manifest itself last year, but there's also many other categories. So Israel-related anti-Semitism, white supremacist anti-Semitism, COVID-related anti-Semitism, a new category last year. So all of that is broken down. Any of you can find the audit online. Just Google ADL audit, and you'll come to it. We release that every spring. And it's really the numbers, as I said before, that people rely on.
That's something. I mean, just a quick follow up on that. New York and New Jersey being number 1 and number 2 respectively. Is that a function of just that there are more Jews here per capita than there are pretty much anywhere else, or is there something else going on? Just a quick follow up on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's most likely the number of Jews. There's a correlation. You don't need Jews for anti-Semitism. I think we all know that. But in many instances, the more Jews, the more possibility. First of all, there are many attacks on synagogues. More synagogues, obviously, it stands to reason more attacks. The same with more visible Jews. There are many. There's a lot of harassment, especially of the Hasidic community. Certainly, most of the assaults that have taken place are assaults against the Hasidic community. These are very, very visible Jews. You have Hasidic communities across the United States, but the largest concentration of Hasidic Jews are in New York and New Jersey, in Brooklyn, in Rockland County, and in Lakewood, New Jersey. So that all contributes to much higher numbers.
Thanks. Appreciate that answer. Paula, what's happening in high schools and on university campuses? What strategies is Stand With Us implementing to address anti-Semitism specifically in those areas?
Thank you. Yeah, we're very focused and aware of what's happening on campus and in high school, because it's our kids who are being impacted, and it's shocking that they have to face this hatred and vitriol that's directed towards them just because they're Jewish or pro-Israel, or that they're so aware of the anti-Semitism on campus that they walk on eggshells and hide their identities by not wearing a kippah or stars of David. So we've seen professors hold student grades hostage because the students are Jewish. We've seen high school groups align with Black Lives Matter and demand that their school administrators alter the curricula to include their version of the truth about Israel and history. And even locally, at Rutgers, we had the administration backtrack and rescind its own apology for anti-Semitism because that statement didn't mention the Palestinians on campus. So how do we deal with this? Firstly, we're working with universities, states, and even municipalities to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, that's IHRA, their definition of anti-Semitism. And we've seen when schools adopt it, it becomes very successful. So for example, at Florida State University, our Emerson Fellow worked very closely with some other student groups to encourage the passage of the IHRA definition, in spite of tremendous pressure from Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voices for Peace working against it. IHRA passed, and the president of the university then took a very bold step and said that each year there was going to be an annual training program that all staff members had to participate in to make the campus a much more inclusive environment for their Jewish students and employees. And that's an example of why we at Stand With Us work so hard for passage of IHRA. Other examples, at University of Maryland, where there was a pro-BDS bill that was proposed to the student government, our Emerson Fellow worked again with other pro-Israel students and student groups to help defeat that. And what made it worse is that the vote that the student government scheduled to vote on the BDS resolution was intentionally scheduled to be held during Pesach. Oftentimes, it's working with students on one-on-one basis to give them the confidence to stand up to some of these anti-Semitic actions. I mean, it's a really bold thing for a 16-year-old to do. In the case of one of our high school interns in Baltimore, she approached her private school principal because she was outraged at the insistent demands that Black Lives Matter group was making in the school. And she arranged for a school-wide assembly where the entire student body heard from one of our educators, a guy by the name of Hussein Abu Bakr. So you can imagine the surprise of the kids and the impact of the words of a millennial, somebody not much older than they are, who was raised in Cairo as a Jew hater, as an Israel hater, and now understands and shares the importance of the Jewish state and rallies against anti-Semitism. We also have our legal department and our Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, and we work directly with students and faculty and community members who've been targets of anti-Semitism. Frequently, that activity is behind the scenes, but it's usually initiated by those who have been assaulted. So our main strategy on campus in dealing with all of this is education. And that is why the situations that I just shared to you were examples of student-driven activity.
Yeah, that's great work, and getting the IHRA standard widespread adoption is a really major focus. I think that not a lot of people know what that's all about, and we don't have time to get into all the details. But that's a critical thing. So that's good on you. Sarit, we just heard a lot about some pretty rough anti-Semitic incidents in various places online and so forth. What are your thoughts on how the media covers anti-Semitism? Is it covered in the same way the media covers other forms of hate? And if not, is there any way to fix it?
So, first of all, the media covers anti-Semitism in a couple of ways. It ignores it when possible, it downplays it when possible, and it's certainly not covering it the way it covers, for example, we saw anti-Asian hate. The truth is that Jews are more likely per capita to be attacked than any other group. So your average Jew is more likely to be attacked than any other group. The hate crimes, as you know, are well documented to be more pervasive against Jews than any other group. And yet you don't hear about that. You heard a lot about, you had even lawn signs, stop Asian hate, and Asian hate should be stopped. All hate should be stopped. But the truth is that the number one target of hate crimes, per capita again, are Jews. And so anti-Semitism is not covered. And sometimes, in fact, the media is part of it. The media even, for example, during COVID, you could read stories in the New York Times and other publications about COVID, and then the picture that would accompany it, having nothing to do actually with the story, would just be Hasidic Jews. Literally, just out of all the pictures you could choose, they just chose visibly Jewish people to accompany a story about disease. Now, this, of course, brings to mind the classic medieval blood libels and, accusations that Jews bring Black Plague and all of the negative tropes about Jews. So this is something that we are, they also will not cover, for example, when Jews are targeted, you won't necessarily know that they were targeted because they were Jews. You also won't necessarily know who's targeting them because certain favored groups, for example, a large percentage of the assaults against visibly Jewish people in New York, for example, and especially in Brooklyn, some of the boroughs, are by African Americans. And so because that's a favored minority group, you won't see that mentioned or covered, or you will just generally see less coverage of those crimes. So what do we do about it? Well, this is what CAMRA's doing all the time. We have researchers, we are monitoring, and we also rely on members of the public to alert us to problematic media. We're monitoring all the time, and we have researchers who are in communication with the editors, with the journalists all the time, getting corrections, getting pictures taken down, you know, at least off online. Once it's already been printed, for example, in the paper, that's a different story. But we are in constant communication with the media. And then if that's not effective, then we will alert the public. And I actually facilitate letter writing campaigns, and those are also very effective. And that's where we would urge you in the public to get involved, to write letters to the editor, to set the record straight. This is extremely important because, as you know, media shapes public opinion shapes public policy. So we often rely on you, the public. And so again, I would hope that you would go to our website, camera.org, and sign up to get our alerts. It's absolutely free. And then you can be a part of the solution. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that people who know me know that I can't stand is when people write these long diatribes on Facebook or whatever. Put that effort into getting it into a newspaper or other media source, and you'll reach a lot more people and actually maybe make a difference. So that's
both. I say both.
Yeah. So and actually, one thing that you touched on was these tropes and blood libels. Which is actually a segue into the next thing we're going to talk about with Josh. I want to go back to you for a minute. I've been seeing a lot of news reports lately about a significant increase in death threats and intimidation directed at election officials across the U.S. And historically, when democratic norms in a country get eroded, not very good for the Jews. And what makes it even worse is a lot of these threats, they cite a lot of these anti-Semitic tropes. They talk about the Rothschild bankers or George Soros or all this other stuff from the protocols of Elders of Zion, pretty much. Is this something we should be concerned about? And if so, is there anything we can do to stop this before it gets out of control?
Great. Laurent, thank you. Great question. It's deeply troubling when we see this in the media, when we see it from elected officials, when we see the normalization of, you know, classic anti-Semitic stereotypes rebranded, rebottled, and then presented to the public. You know, I think it's incumbent upon, you know, elected officials to use their bully pulpits, right? And we encourage, when we work with elected officials, or even when we work with community groups, to use their voice, to use their microphone, if you will, to stand up and to speak out and to say that this is unacceptable. That this like anti-Semitism in any form is unacceptable. And there must be no caveats, no qualifiers when condemning anti-Jewish hate, you know, the words or actions that these individuals are using, you know, threats of violence. It has to be called out in all spaces. And then it needs to also be unequivocally condemned. And then those individuals who are using their platforms to speak out against it need to also reaffirm their solidarity with the Jewish community and call on other community leaders, whether they're elected officials or just community leaders, to join them. So community leaders, faith leaders, etc. You know, something that, you know, you didn't touch on, which I'm also somewhat concerned by, is the lax attitude we see with elected officials and people in the public sphere using Holocaust analogies or comparisons, or Nazi analogies and comparisons as well, to score a political point. And we've seen this historically for a while. Right now we're seeing a lot of health safety measures, you know, referred to as one step closer to the Holocaust, or using horrible Holocaust analogies. And I think we can all agree that health safety measures or public safety health measures are in no way comparable to the atrocities of the Holocaust, right? Those types of analogies and comparison minimize the atrocities that are committed by Nazis. They dishonor the memory of those who were murdered, and they should be stopped and called out. Elected officials, or even candidates for office. You see this a lot with particularly in New Jersey just had an election. We've seen a lot of this as well. So candidates for office and elected officials really bear an outsized responsibility for their words and actions. So it's imperative that when incidents like this happen, they're called out, and that they then take corrective action. And that's where organizations like ours, or the ADL, or CAMRA, or Open Door, or Stand With Us are really effective in working with leaders, working with them to help them take corrective action, to ensure that they're working with members of the broader community to make it clear that their word and actions were unacceptable, and then also to ease any tension that might arise.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask about the Holocaust stuff. It's horrifying. I mean, I see these videos of people wearing yellow stars to protest against vaccines and whatever. And whatever your thoughts on medical decisions, is it's not the Holocaust. I mean, it's really it's not a great look. And it's really good to know that there's some pushback happening, and that's actually something that I think we're going to be looking at too as a community, because we can't. That's just not going to fly. So now I want to turn to John from Open Door. We've heard a lot about what these problems are for the most part, and where they're coming from, and what some of the responses are. But on the content side, I mean, you said earlier you're trying to be Vox and that for Jewish interests. How does what everything we've heard from the panel, how does that influence your content creation, and what are you doing? What is Open Door doing to address some of these issues?
Yeah, so I think one thing we could all agree is there is a lot of information out there, and a lot of information out there comes in the form of noise. I mean, social media is just filled with noise. The news cycle is filled with noise. It's really hard to distill down what's important. And especially for us, we have a funnel approach where we're trying to get as wide of an audience at top, which is Jewish or Jewish adjacent. And at the bottom, we're trying to have someone who becomes a brand loyalist, not just for our brand, but actual for Judaism and Zionism and things like that. So there's a very long journey down there, and all of our content is made to touch somebody on their path down the funnel. So with that, we have brand guardrails, because our main goal is not only to reach 18 to 34-year-olds, it's to engage them. A lot of people can say that they're reaching. We need to engage this age group, especially now in the day and age where metrics are fuzzy, and you can be like, oh, we really reached this many people. But the flip side to that is, how many people did you actually engage? Or are you just throwing things back out there into the universe and adding to the noise? So for us, it's one part science, I like to say, and one part art. The science comes in, we look at what's trending. We have tools to see what people are actually physically searching for. So for example, The Shrink Next Door came out. Paul Rudd's been in the news cycle. Everyone's Googling, is Paul Rudd Jewish? We make sure that we have an article to capture that audience that's coming to us from search. Then there's newsjacking. We all know what happened last spring with Israel and also with Sheikh Jarrah. We wrote a very nuanced article that was actually picked up by Newsweek magazine as a Jewish perspective on what's going on in that neighborhood, that they called Fair and Accurate. So yay, that's what we're looking for. And then there comes the gut. And it is trying to predict what people are going to be looking for, what their interests will be. And then layered on top of all of that is the extra complication of what platform. What happened at GW? Everyone heard about it with the desecration of the Torah. We purposefully chose not to lean into that moment on the website because information was out there. But where we really leaned into was on TikTok, which is where our 18 to 34-year-old audience is. And that video has almost 2 million views on it now. So it's trying to find that engagement piece on top of creating the content as well.
That's great, and I'm very happy to hear that you guys are active on TikTok, because it's just not something that I've been able to get my own head around. I am such
the old man with my staff.
I think I just missed that boat by a few years, and this old dog is not learning that new trick anymore.
They call me an elder millennial, so I feel it.
Yeah, same. All right. Well, that's some good positive stuff coming out. I'm sure Sarit was happy to hear about your Newsweek encounter. Scott, FBI, as they do around this time of year, recently released their hate crime statistics, and spoiler alert, the vast majority of religious bias crimes were again against us Jews. Which is even more disturbing, because it's something you said before, the most visibly Jewish people happen to be in our area, but there are a lot more non-visibly Jewish Jews in America than visibly Jewish Jews. So you have to think about, frighteningly, how much worse it could be. But how much of the documented anti-Semitism that comes in that report is motivated by anti-Zionism, and how much is quote unquote classic anti-Semitism? What are the challenges associated with pushing back on anti-Zionist anti-Semitism, especially when we see it coming from religious and civic leaders?
So let's talk about the hate crimes report for a second, because I think it's very important. I think people get confused by the hate crimes report. The hate crimes report is about crimes, actual crimes. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism that are not crimes because it's speech. So, our audit, for example, captures all forms of anti-Semitism, not just those that rise to the level of a crime. So very, very important. You should rely on the hate crimes data. It's important, but not every form of anti-Semitism rises to the level of a crime. A lot of what goes on campus, a lot of what goes on social media are not actually crimes. And just actually on the point about campus, since I seem to be the one reporting the statistics, I just want to mention ADL just came out with a survey that we did in partnership with Hillel. And I think he came out with a very important statistic, which is that over 40%, so this was a survey of students on campus in over 200 campuses for the past academic year. Over 40% of students had experienced some form of anti-Semitism or witnessed some form of anti-Semitism. It's a huge number. And the vast majority of those that did experience it or witness it did not report it. So that's our hurdle, to get them to report it. Just going back to the statistics regarding the hate crimes, I also want to mention, Sarit, you mentioned that per capita, Jews are victims of these hate crimes, and that's true. But I do want to point out that the largest number, the vast majority of hate crimes are perpetrated against African Americans and not against Jews. The statistics related to Jews are within faith-based hate crimes. But you're right that per capita, since we only represent 2% of the population, we are experiencing hate crimes far disproportionately to our numbers. The question of anti-Israel acts of anti-Semitism and how much of it is anti-Israel. I mean, I could go back to our audit. So our audit shows a pretty level amount of anti-Israel, anti-Semitism year to year for the past few years. This year, I imagine there's going to be an uptick for 2021, but for 2020, it's around 175. So 175 out of 2,000. It's not the vast majority of incidents, but it's obviously a very significant piece of the incidents that we're encountering. And I would also say, just on the topic of fighting against this kind of anti-Israel anti-Semitism, helping people to understand when it actually rises to the level of anti-Semitism, I think, is our biggest hurdle there. Paul, you mentioned the IRA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and that talks about when criticism of Israel rises to the level of anti-Semitism. I think a lot of people don't realize when that happens. And I think a lot of people fault the Jewish community, attack the Jewish community for saying, why can't I criticize Israel without being accused of anti-Semitism? So I think a big hurdle of ours is making sure that people understand that piece. And, you know, anti-Israel rhetoric is one of, or anti-Israel attacks, when it rises the level of anti-Semitism, is one of 7 tropes. You know, we brought up the issue of tropes before, and I want to make sure everybody listening understands this. So anti-Semitism manifests itself in a series of conspiracy theories. And anti-Israelism is one of those conspiracy theories, but there's another 6, and almost all forms of anti-Semitism invoke one of those tropes. If we have time, I can go into it, but it's very important to understand that, and it's different from other forms of racism or bigotry or bias because of that. Very, very unique form of bias and bigotry. Really doesn't look like systemic racism against African Americans, for example, or attacks on the LGBTQ+ community.
All right. Thank you for that explanation. Paula, we know the support for Israel among younger Jews is not exactly what it used to be. What do we need to do to reconnect the next generation to Israel, especially Jews that identify as progressive or liberal? What are the strategies on how to defend Israel, even when we don't agree with every single little thing the Israeli government does?
Younger Jews don't identify with Israel the way we do. I think it's probably fair to say that most of us on this call remember the 1967 war, when it was very tenuous and Israel's very existence was threatened. Well, Jews under 40 today don't know an Israel whose existence was threatened. I mean, the Israel they know has always been a military and technology power. I think one of the issues today is that young adults are not having Israel conversations at home. They're not connecting with Israel in, you know, a traditional family sense, and the framework of what Israel is comes from social media. Many of our kids, you know, they want to sit at the cool kids table, and to do that, they have to adopt the language of the progressive left, and that language is pretty anti-Israel, and it's very accepting of intersectional ideology that places victimhood as the most important issue. Well, Israel is not a victim. Look, I was on a Zoom meeting on Monday. Sarit was on that meeting as well, and we heard from Congressman Richie Torres of New York. And he presented a very powerful message. He described himself as young. He's the youngest member of Congress, growing up poor in the projects in New York, Black, Hispanic, gay, and progressive. And it's precisely because of all of that, that he's pro-Israel. He said, in fact, that being a progressive means being pro-Israel. And I think that's a great example of how you can appreciate the democracy of Israel, a land where our shared values support a vibrant and diverse population. So what are we doing on campus now to work with young people who define themselves as progressive? Well, right now on campus, it's the first time that the kids have been together in a long time. So much of what we're doing right now is just to re-engage the campus community. One of the things that we did recently at Rutgers is that we hosted Ethiopian Israeli activist Shagar Araro. She spoke about the two-state solution to a very large audience. She's very progressive, and it's hard to denounce Israel as an apartheid state when you hear about the conflict from a Black Jewish woman who proudly describes herself as pro-Israel. And if you want to see an example of what she says, I mean, follow her on Instagram. She's Black Jewish Magic, and it's very interesting to see how she looks at the conflict and Israel, and how she relates to young people. We know that registration for birthright is high, and our Stand With Us campus coordinators, who, by the way, are in their 20s. So our coordinators who mentor our Emerson Fellows on campus and our high school, our Leventhal High School interns, they're young, and that makes them very relatable to the students that they work with. So at Rutgers and on campus, they're also working to recruit students to go to Birthright. And I think most of you here would agree that getting somebody to Israel is one of the most effective ways to communicate the truth about Israel. We have our senior director of international student programs from Israel. She's currently here in the United States, and she's going to be at Rutgers this week and also at Princeton. And she's going to be discussing Israel and the West Bank. And she speaks very clearly to a progressive audience. And one of the things that makes her so effective is that she uses the language of the younger generation. And it gives her so much credibility, especially when she acknowledges that Israel is not a perfect entity, but rather a country like any other country. We also host on campus events that engage and invite conversation outside of the political realm. We call them experiential Israel programs. So one of them, for example, is it's a lemonade stand, Squeeze the Challenges. And we offer the kids that stop by a free can of lemonade if they engage in conversation with our students who share their stories, or Israel stories, the Jewish stories of overcoming expulsion and oppression and genocide and rebirth. And we invite the students that don't know Israel stories to share their stories about the same. So it's a program about spreading positivity and empowerment and connecting all of those stories to Israel. We also host workshops for high school and college and community, by the way, on how to recognize anti-Semitism at school and online. And I know it's very complementary to some of the work that Scott's doing with ADL and that Sarit is doing on campus, that Cameron's doing on campus. But it helps the student discern the difference between legitimate criticism of Israel and what's anti-Semitism. So those are just a couple of the ways that we work on campus to educate, engage, and activate students.
That's great, and I think it's especially, I mean, Congressman Torres is a phenomenal ally, and there are actually a lot more people like him than I think a lot of people might recognize. I really think, and it's great that what you're doing is empowering and bringing those people to the forefront rather than just arguing, you know, with one group, to kind of bring people from that group and say, no, we're not all like that. I think that's a much more effective tactic for reaching people, and it's great that you're doing that and the work that you're doing on campus. Sarit, Israel and the media, not that great. How do we get the media to accept the reality that Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel and that Israelis are not a bunch of Europeans colonizing a foreign land? How do we get the media to report the conflict in a more balanced way?
Well, so it's very similar to what I talked about in terms of the reporting on anti-Semitism. First of all, the media bias is it manifests in a number of ways, and a lot of it is just what's not covered and what's the context that is not given. For example, John mentioned Sheikh Jarrah, which was a neighborhood in Jerusalem, which was known as Shimon HaTzadik. The fact that the property was owned by Jews, that it was Jewish-owned property that had been taken from them, et cetera, all those things just never made it. They never made it into the coverage, except maybe in John's piece, which I'm glad about. But so we handle it in very much the same way, and I would urge everybody to go to our website, camera.org, to look at that, and you'll see how much we're doing. And this is the more important thing, though. What I would ask is, what are you all doing, and what are all of us doing? And so the thing I would encourage you all to do is talk about it. I mean, you're here because you know and care about Jews and Israel. And so I would urge you, when you hear something that's not right at work or even in a family gathering or some community event, to please speak up, to say something, to correct someone. Of course, nobody wants to get into a argument, but you'd be surprised how open people are and how receptive they are when you just simply mention something. And don't be afraid to do that. Let me just give you a very quick story. I was at the doctor's office and I was waiting in the waiting room, and I picked up an old Time magazine, and it was a very famous Time magazine cover. It was a daisy chain in the shape of a Magen David in a Jewish star. And the headline on the cover was, "Why Israel Doesn't Care About Peace." And so I knew it was ridiculous because I know Israelis care about peace. I had it up, I was reading it. I was just trying to see how bad it would be. I hear a voice from the other side of the magazine saying, "Isn't that terrible?" So I lower the magazine, and I wasn't sure if she was talking to me because maybe it was terrible that she had a 45-minute wait for the doctor or something. But I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, and indicating the magazine cover, "Isn't it terrible that Israel doesn't care about peace?" So I said to her, "Oh, this? Well, this is wrong. You know that in Israel, every parent sends their 17 and 18-year-old kids to the army, boys and girls. And nobody cares about peace more than the parents of soldiers." And she said to me, "I didn't know that. Thank you. Thanks for telling me that." So you see, you don't have to get into an argument with your crazy brother-in-law. You just mention some things that they might not know. And then, and if they, say a colleague at work mentions something about Israel and they know you, and believe me, to them, you represent all Jews. You represent everybody who cares about Israel. So if you don't say anything, then they think to themselves, well, my Jewish friend didn't say anything, so it must be true. It must be right. So that's what I would say, and I would encourage you, and that's true on social media or in a personal conversation, or of course, writing letters to the editor, again, which I would encourage. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sarit. I want to keep this this topic going on the whole indigenous angle, because I think that that's something that is not really discussed enough, especially outside our own bubble. So John, maybe you could comment a little bit about this. How do we help people understand that Israel is the ancestral homeland of the Jews, and that we're not just a bunch of white European invaders? How do we get progressive Jews to understand that? And can we convince indigenous rights advocates to accept this reality? I mean, we just, in October, Columbus Day, a lot of people refer to it now as Indigenous Peoples Day. That's us too, right? How do we make that? How do we get that message out there? How do we make that leap? Is it even possible?
So I'll start with the progressive part first, how to reach them, because I think that's a critical thing. You first have to understand that audience and educate within the context of that, and accepting the fact that the vast majority of young Jews are liberal. And it's not necessarily a knowledge problem. It's more of an apathy problem. So what do you do with that? And basically, a huge guardrail for Gen Z is that authenticity. So you have to get people who look like Gen Z, who talk like Gen Z, to distill down the facts. I mean, classical Hasbara in that sense, I think, has really failed. It's too slick, in other words. So like, in order to convey this story, you have to speak in the language and in the editing that this generation actually speaks to. So we can make fun of TikTok videos, but one of our better performing TikTok videos, we're an Israeli-based company as well. We sent one of our reporters to the IKEA. Everyone talks about IKEA in Israel, and we're taking photos and having fun in IKEA. but we selected a shot very purposefully in there, a welcome mat in Arabic. And it was just like one shot. And automatically everyone's seizing on that and saying, oh, you're culturally appropriating Arabic language. How dare you? But this is what comes down to that brand funnel that I was talking about. Our loyalists, they came into comments and you're like, well, first of all, do you know that there are 2 million Arabs that live in Israel and are citizens? And did you know that Arabic is actually a language in Israel that's officially recognized? So it's moments like that and like purposefully selecting which ones to lean into to keep that narrative going. The whole article, we could write as many articles as we want saying Jews are native to Judea. I mean, there was no such thing called Palestine. It was British mandate Palestine. This generation's heard all of that. And that's what I mean by noise. They have their blinders on. So you have to find, it's harder. You have to find those moments like an Arabic welcome mat in IKEA, and then you get people commenting. But that's the difficulty now.
Yeah, that is, yes, you can't spell Judea without Jews. Yes, I mean, it works on us, but not on too many other people, unfortunately. Josh, a little more directly, Israel advocacy critical with regards to government relations and community and all that. Where does that fit into the Federation's policy agenda? And is there anything we can do about members of the government who are just out and out anti-Israel, anti-American Israeli cooperation? And what can we really do about that, and what kind of results can we show for our efforts?
Sure. I know we're sort of pressed for time, so I'll try and answer this really great and complex question quickly.
Yeah.
So Israel today, I mean, as you've heard from my colleagues, right, faces an intense and increasingly sophisticated assault on its right to exist as a sovereign democratic Jewish state. On college campuses and within professional and academic associations and global politics, and even in our local community, instances of delegitimization targeting Israel continue to rise, and sophisticated tactics such as those that employ BDS movement increasingly used to spread these anti-Israel messages. So how does this fit into Federation's advocacy agenda, or what can we do? Well, we're going to keep doing what we do best, which is to educate, organize, and mobilize the Jewish community to counteract these acts of delegitimization and to positively shape and lead the conversation about Israel. That's why Federation coordinates and guides strategies that combat discrimination, anti-Semitism, and other attacks on the Jewish state of Israel. So through our advocacy work, we're proactively supporting measures that support Israel, counter delegitimization through grassroots, bipartisan efforts at the local, state, and federal level. Through our education work, we make the case for Israel in critical sectors when Israel's legitimacy is often challenged. We teach allies and partners to be effective advocates for Israel, sharing proven community organizing and messaging strategy. And we teach allies and partners to be effective advocates for Israel by sharing proven community by sharing those tactics. For example, I want to talk just something that's really successful that Federation does is our mission to Israel that we hold for elected officials. This is a great way for Federation to use and leverage their relationships with elected leaders. Some of them who are already allies, we bring them to Israel on a regular basis. We turn those allies into champions. For those individuals that, like a Richie Torres 12 years ago, not 12 years ago, like 6 or 7 years ago when he first was in the city council, he had no thoughts, ideas, or opinions about Israel. What changed? The JCRC reached out to him and took him to Israel on a life-changing mission. So we try and find those individuals who are newly elected, who may not have a strong opinion, idea, or thought about Israel, and we turn them into allies with the hopes of turning them into champions. And then we mobilize individuals. We activate community members and allies, provide them with critical information, resources, and infrastructure to help build support for Israel and fight delegitimization. And the other thing that we benefit from here in New Jersey is that we have a New Jersey Israel Commission, and that is vital, for the state. It sends a very strong message that New Jersey maintains a strong relationship with the state of Israel, helps promote bilateral relations, economic interests, or security, economic and political interests And we are working, in cooperation with elected officials, the administration, and our partners at the Commission to encourage that and foster that spirit of cooperation between the citizens of the state of Israel and the state of New Jersey, whether it's through the promotion of trade or cultural or even educational exchanges.
Yeah, that is a great thing, and I think Unilever just found out what the results of some of that kind of stuff can be. Yep. So we're obviously clearly into overtime here, everyone. So would like to thank everyone for sticking with us here. We have another round of questions. We're going to try to keep the answers a little bit shorter, not that I don't know how you could make them shorter because they're such great answers, but obviously we're where we are. So moving back to Scott, online anti-Semitism is a pretty major problem. How can we respond to that better, and especially on social media outlets, like TikTok, which is something that John referenced before, but not just, across the board. What do we do about that?
So I think I mentioned before that our Center for Technology and Society is focused on online hate. Also, our Center on Extremism is focused on extremist content on social media. So we really have a good sense of what's going on. Just to give you the statistics in terms of what we see online, we have a survey that we do every year called the Online Hate and Harassment Survey. And that showed overall, not just the Jewish community, but overall, more than 40% of people who are online or on Facebook or Twitter or Reddit or these different social media sites are experiencing some form of harassment. With the Jewish community, it's slightly lower in the 30s, but really very, very surprising. Huge numbers of people are experiencing hate online. In terms of how to combat that, so there are lots of ways to combat that. First of all, you can combat it through legislation. So the listeners may not realize, but social media is handled in a different way from other forms of media. So print media, television, they're liable for what is on their sites. But Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which was an act enacted in 1996, absolved internet sites for liability for what is on their sites. And that holds sway even to this day with social media sites. So ADL has been pressing for reform of Section 230, so government regulation, very, very important. Secondly, we need to press these social media companies to remove hate from their sites. A lot of people cite free speech concerns, but free speech refers to the government not curtailing free speech. It has nothing to do with a private company. They can remove anything they want. They can have any policies that they want on their site. So this idea that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat, they all have policies on their sites, but they don't. First of all, they could be more robust, and secondly, they need to more vigorously enforce the rules that they've set forward. Now, ADL started something called the Stop Hate for Profit Coalition last summer, the summer of 2020. This was a coalition of African-American, Latino, Jewish organizations that came together and pressed social media to remove hate from their site. And we saw a series of changes through the fall. We saw that Facebook decided that they would no longer allow Holocaust denial on their site. We saw people's accounts being suspended. And that is the direct result of the kinds of pressure of the Stop Hate for Profit Coalition, which asked advertisers to remove their advertising. This is what social media sites pay attention to. This is at the broader level, but at the individual level, you all have a responsibility. You all have a responsibility to take action against social media and what they're doing. And how can you do that? Because if you see hate, if you see misinformation on social media sites, you should be reporting that. I think a lot of people look at it, they rail against it, they show it to others, but they don't actually report it. And nobody wants to have their account suspended or their account revoked if they know that somebody is watching. When they like, comment, or share something, they will think twice about doing it. ADL has something called the Cyber Action Safety Guide. So you can just Google it, ADL Cyber Action Safety Guide, and that is a document that has maybe 20 tech companies on it, and next to each name are 2 links. One link is the policy, Facebook, the policy that they adhere to, and the ways to report a violation of that policy. Everybody should be playing that role. We are all individual advocates on social media. Social media plays a very important role in terms of putting forth counter speech. You should all be out there being active on social media, but you should also be reporting hate and misinformation. And that's the best way to ensure that people will think twice before they put that kind of content online.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's mind-boggling that Holocaust denial takes a pressure campaign for a company to recognize that it's a problem. I mean,
in 2018, Mark Zuckerberg stood before the world and he said, as much as I abhor Holocaust denial, I will never remove it from my site. And it took 2 years of intense pressure to get him to do that.
Just unreal, truly unreal. But thank you for your hard work on that. And then it is true. We are all in this together, and we all have a role to play. Paula, from what age do you think we should start talking to our kids about anti-Semitism? And what tools can we provide them to help them cope with it, especially when they hear it from students, or in my opinion, the worst case scenario comes from their teacher or their professor?
Okay, so I think it's never too soon to learn about anti-Semitism and anti-Israel, anti-Zionism. So the real focus of our work has traditionally been in high school and college, but we realize that kids really need to establish a relationship with Israel before they get to high school. And that's why we developed our Israel Link curriculum for middle schoolers. And it's an online curriculum that helps the kids develop their own relationship with Israel based on their own moral and ethical values. So it's online and it's student-centric, and they learn about the historical ties of Jews to the homeland, but they also engage with modern Israel. And what this does is helps them on their own personal journey, creating these ties that they can truly call their own. This is where the seeds of that pro-Israel self-confidence and courage to stand up to anti-Semitism are planted. It's really terrible when kids are the focus of anti-Semitic attacks, and there are several ways that you can deal with it. For one, you can contact you at JCRC. I know that you're very well equipped to help a parent or a student talk to the school principal if there's an incident with the kid assaulting another kid. You really need to report these attacks to the ADL, as Scott said. We really need to document these. Where a student is threatened by teachers or professors in high school or in college, they really need to stand with us, and we will help them work with the appropriate school teams. The work with the student, those teams work with the students to address those issues directly with programming information, connections with other students to offer support. In high school, it's especially important for the student not to feel isolated when they experience something like this. If there is a potential legal issue with the threat, our Sadolf Legal Center has a slate of pro bono attorneys across the country that stand ready to help. If there's a criminal assault, like an arson at a Hillel that we experienced at the University of Delaware, our Center for Combating Anti-Semitism works very closely with law enforcement to help the kids deal with this. But the best thing that I can suggest to you now is to get your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, your neighbors' kids to stand with us for our virtual International Student Conference in January. This will equip your kids with the information and the tools and the networks that they need to be strong activists, to fight anti-Semitism and to make an impact and to advocate for themselves. So it's a forum with experts, and they from all around the world. The kids connect with their peers globally. It's a free workshop, and it is a truly inspirational and a global educational experience. And it's easy to register. It's free. Please just go to our website, standwithus.com/SWUCONF2022. Very important, and I invite you all to do that. Thank you.
That's great, Paula. And I did not even know you had that network of lawyers. That's great. And
Yeah, very important.
About 10 years ago. Sarit, there have been clear examples of anti-Semitism among journalists, often but not always related to Israel coverage. Why does this keep happening? And is there any responsible adult at these respective media outlets, and anything we can do on an individual level?
So a couple of things, and I'll try to be quick. Many of the reporters who cover Israel in major outlets, there are no more minor outlets, and there are no more minor outlets that have international presence. But the wire services, the AP, for example, or something like New York Times or BBC, they are working frequently in their coverage. They're working with Arab stringers. And so they will, these stringers, and for example, in Gaza or in Judea and Samaria, they are often, let's say in the best case scenario, they're people of good faith, but they are afraid for themselves, for their own safety, or for their families. So they are going to toe the line. Now, Gaza is run by Hamas. You're not going to cross them. By the way, journalists who cross Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority end up in very bad prisons, tortured and beaten, etc. So the stringers that these journalists are working with, that Western journalists are working with, are at the very least afraid, in some cases, actually Hamas operatives. So that's part of it. I wouldn't want to say that necessarily reporters are anti-Semitic, but what I will say is they often don't know what they're reporting on. For example, Jody Rudorin, who was the New York Times bureau chief, had previously been covering education. She was not any kind of specialist in the Middle East, and they sent her over there to cover the Middle East. So they don't know. And also they are hanging out there in Israel in a bubble of sort of like-minded people, European, reporters, and then they're hanging with their stringers. And so they don't know that much. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't know where to get the right information. So that's really, I think, probably part of the problem. And all right, I'm going to be brief.
No, thanks. It's a great point. How much of this is really about just people who just not well trained on the topic and just getting thrown into a conflict that they don't really understand. Like anybody else starting at a new job, they're going to make mistakes, and the problem is their mistakes reach millions and millions of people.
Yes, I will just say very briefly, that doesn't mean they don't have a responsibility to know. Right. They do have a responsibility to know. They do have a responsibility to find out. And the fact that they choose not to, that's a different story. So I don't want to give them too much off the hook.
Oh, no, for sure. And we know the organization that's going to make sure that holds them to account for that. This is going to be our last question. We're going to close it out with John from Open Door. John, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. How can we use Open Door Media's content to make our case outside of the Jewish world? You touched on it before about Hasbara and all that, and the conventional, slickly edited and all that other stuff. We're a century into Hasbara and making our case and doing all that, and every year seems more grim than the year before. What can we be doing differently? Because what we've been doing up until now has led us to this point.
Yes, that's a really interesting question. And that like goes to the core of what I'm trying to do with the Unpack brand, because you have two very different audiences. And I think that one of the problems is we try to use the content that we create for Jewish outreach to also appeal to a wider audience. And it just doesn't work. You're talking to two different groups of people with different interests and different backgrounds, and they're coming to the piece. But there are ways where it does work. So, like, for example, when we use our SEO strategy, our search optimization strategy, we notice things like Jeff Bezos is trending and people are searching, is Jeff Bezos Jewish? Which, for whatever reason, when anybody is in the news, they immediately go to Google and type in, are they Jewish? So part of that strategy is, okay, we're going to get this wide audience from across the world who's searching for this, but we also want to give them a nugget. No, Jeff Bezos isn't Jewish, and you could stop the article there. But we use these moments as a wider learning moment. So Jeff Bezos isn't Jewish, but did you know that he was the target of an anti-Semitic propaganda campaign by the Saudis back when he was starting Amazon? So then you get a little bit more information out there. Then you end the article with, oh, and the current CEO of Amazon is Jewish. And then you try to get them to go to other places. That's the digital side. On the other side of what we're doing is it's partnerships like with what's happening today, just making sure that our content gets out there when it's needed. So these explainer videos that we have, like, they're built for a wider audience, not necessarily Jewish audience. So it's just trying to find the audience on the platforms that they're on and getting it in front of their eyes, which is really, really difficult these days.
Yeah, it sure is, and it's great to hear about some different angles, but really it's great to hear from all of you. And I think I certainly learned some things that I didn't know beforehand, and I hope our attendees did as well. I want to thank all of you for your time tonight and for your time every day doing what it is that you do, and not just doing what you do, but also giving us in the community who are not, this isn't our full-time job, the tools and the outlets to participate and make a difference, because pretty clearly it's going to be much better if we're all united as one cohesive community, as opposed to just, balkanized different individuals going for themselves. So or tribes, I guess, if to to put a Jewish spin on it. So again, thank you very much. I want to turn it back over to Dan, who's going to sum up a little bit and talk about our upcoming schedule for what to do for the community, for all the attendees. I'm speaking now to all of you, for what you can do if you want to get more involved and utilize some of these strategies that we learned about tonight. So Dan, take it away.
Thank you, Liran. So I will be very brief. I'm putting in the chat right now the website address for our Jewish Community Relations Council, where you can read a lot more about what you can do locally. That's one. Two, December 15th is the next part of this session, where we will be talking about community engagement opportunities here in the heart of New Jersey, in Middlesex and Monmouth County. So I encourage you to join us there. We are going to try to do that in person, but I will be sending out more information in the next week or so. I would like to, I couldn't see if all of them were here, but I would like to thank the JCRC committee members that are on this call, Rabbi Mark Klein, Joel Krinsky, Phyllis Freed, Amy Mallet, Elliot Spack. I know that there are board members here, so thank you for the board members for attending and for your support. Thank you to our partners for helping us recruit our synagogues and our other institutions. And thank you, panelists. I'm in this game, and I did also, I'm with Liran, I learned new stuff tonight. So that just shows how much there is to know and how much there's still left to do. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to send me at some point tomorrow, whenever you can, some links to what you talked about tonight, so that we can provide this information to our community. And that's it. Thank you very, very much to everyone. And I hope to see you on December 15th.